What is money? Most people never ask that question. They use it, chase it, spend it, save it. But rarely do they stop to consider what it actually is, or what makes it work. And yet, money is half of every transaction. Without money, modern economies don't just slow down, they collapse. So here's the question. What really happens when money breaks? This isn't a philosophical thought experiment. It's a historical fact. Money has broken before, and it will break again. When it does, the consequences are never mild. Inflation, collapse of savings, boom and bust cycles, loss of trust, expansion of state power. These are the hallmarks of monetary decay, and the United States is no exception. You've probably heard the phrase, since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the US dollar has lost 95% of its value. That's not a meme, it's statistical reality. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI calculator, what cost $1 in 1913 costs over $25 today. Other long-term measurements, like gold prices and historical CPI indexes, confirm this devastating erosion of purchasing power. This story of the American dollar is not just about coins, banks, or central bankers. It's about how a nation's monetary choices shape everything else. War, debt, social peace, inequality, economic booms, and devastating crashes. The promise of sound money. In the late 18th century, the founding generation had lived through the collapse of the Continental dollar. They saw firsthand what happens when governments print money to pay bills. Inflation, destruction of trust, and economic paralysis. That's why they gave Congress the power to coin money, and deliberately restricted the ability to print unbacked paper currency. The Coinage Act of 1792 created the US dollar and tied it to specific weights of gold and silver, establishing a bimetallic standard that lasted, with some interruptions, for nearly a century. That dollar was strong. It didn't need slogans or government propaganda. It held its value because it was redeemable for something real. In fact, as documented by long-term commodity indexes and gold prices, the dollar actually gained purchasing power over the 19th century, especially during periods of hard money policies. Imagine a dollar that buys more over time, not less. Trust built on restraint. During the 19th century, America's money was not perfect, but it was stable. There were panics, yes, but there was also restraint. Greenbacks, flat paper money, were introduced during the Civil War, causing significant inflation. Yet after the war, the government committed to returning to gold parity, even at the cost of painful deflation. By 1879, the $20.67 per ounce standard was restored, and the dollar's credibility was stronger than ever. It was one of the few times in history when a government devalued its currency and then chose to undo the damage. That choice paid off. Throughout the Gilded Age, the United States became one of the world's leading economic powers. Investment flowed in, savings were rewarded, real wages rose. Confidence in the dollar was so strong that American bonds traded at a premium on world markets. All of this under a gold standard that restrained reckless expansion, breaking the foundation. But that era would not last. In 1913, under pressure from banking interests and reformers, the Federal Reserve was created. It was supposed to be a lender of last resort, a stabilizer of credit. Instead, it almost immediately became a central engine of money creation and inflation. During World War I, the Fed helped finance the war by expanding the money supply. After a brief deflation in the early 1920s, credit expansion resumed. Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises warned that the artificial boom of the 1920s would end in collapse. It did. The stock market crash of 1929 was not the cause of the Great Depression. It was the symptom of a credit-fueled monetary bubble engineered by the Fed. In response, President Roosevelt took an unthinkable step. He severed the domestic dollar's tie to gold in 1933. Americans were forced by law to surrender their gold at $20.67 per ounce. Then the government revalued it to $35 per ounce, a devaluation of 40%. gold was now reserved for central banks. The public held paper. The end of sound money was over. Global power, fiat core. After World War II, the US emerged as the global economic leader. Under the Bretton Woods system, the dollar became the world's reserve currency, redeemable in gold for foreign governments, but not for American citizens. This illusion of gold backing persisted for decades. But by the late 1960s, the cracks were obvious. The US was printing far more dollars than it had gold reserves to support. Foreign governments began demanding gold for their dollar holdings. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window, ending the Bretton Woods system. From that moment, the dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith in government. The result was predictable. The dollar's value fell rapidly. Inflation soared in the 1970s. Gold skyrocketed from $35 to over $800 per ounce. Interest rates exceeding 15% were needed to halt the collapse. A century of erosion. The long-term purchasing power of the dollar tells a grim story. Historical data shows a mostly flat line until 1913, then a steep, continuous drop. In 1800, $1 bought what $1 bought. In 1900, that dollar was still worth nearly the same. In 2000, it bought less than 5 cents of 1913 value. Today, it's closer to 3 cents. The dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power since the Fed was created. That is not an accident. It is the product of monetary policy divorced from restraint. This erosion has accelerated in recent decades. In response to the 2008 crisis, and again during the COVID-19 lockdowns, the Fed expanded the money supply dramatically. M2 tripled in 2 decades, from approximately $7 trillion in 2000 to over $22 trillion by 2025. Each new round of quantitative easing was sold as a rescue, but in truth, it diluted every existing dollar. What we lost. Sound money wasn't just about price stability. It was about discipline, fairness, and trust. A dollar that can't be printed at will constrains war, debt, and political manipulation. As Mises said, sound money still means today what it meant in the 19th century, the gold standard. For him, and for Rothbard, money was not a tool of policy, but a foundation of liberty. But today's dollar is managed by unelected bureaucrats. Interest rates are set by committee. Bailouts are funded with printed money. Entire generations grow up thinking inflation is normal and even necessary. They are taught to believe that 2% inflation is healthy, when in truth, it is a silent tax that erodes savings, pensions, and wages. This is why monetary history matters. No empire survives the destruction of its currency, and no society remains free when its money becomes political. The US dollar was once as good as gold. Now it's only as good as the next Fed statement. If that doesn't concern you, it should. Because what's at stake isn't just your wallet, it's your freedom. Now you've seen what is not seen. And remember, the essential is invisible to the eye.